Hi, I'm TheBruSho, and this is TheBruSho. And today, we're taking a look at all grain brewing. If you've ever brewed an extract beer kit before, then you know the limitations and pitfalls it can have. You're limited in the ingredients and flexibility, and while technically you can brew a good beer with extracts, if you really want to take your brewing to the next level, then stick around while we learn about brewing all grain. If you've never brewed beer before, I recommend you checking out my Brewing 101 video on the basics of beer making. That way you can get a better understanding of the overall brewing process. All grain refers to using the raw ingredients of malt to create your wort, or unfermented beer. Extract, whether liquid or dry, is a mixture of malts, and you really don't know the quality or age of them, meaning you're kind of rolling the dice on what you're getting, and you don't have much wiggle room for flavor. But by brewing all grain, you open up the door to endless possibilities and combination of malts, and it gives you the opportunity to tweak your recipes to get the best beer possible. But before getting ahead of ourselves, let's dive into what the actual grains are. Brewing grains come from several crops, but typically we're talking about barley, wheat, and rye. The grains we use in beer have been malted, which is the precise process of steeping the grains until they germinate, then halting germination at the perfect point by drying, and then heating the grains by kilning. This malting process converts the starches in the grains into sugars that can later be extracted to create the sweet wort. There are a ton of options for malts, and the longer they're kilned, or even roasted, the deeper and darker the color and flavor will be. Color is represented either by SRM or Lovibond, and the higher the number, the darker the color you'll get from it. Malts can be broken into a few categories for use. Base malts, the backbone and canvas for your beer. These should make up a good majority of your grain bill, anywhere from 50 to 100%. Common varieties are Pilsner, pale malts like 2-row or 6-row, and pale ale malts. Toasted malts, the flavor punches. This is where you can really add some complexity and pizzazz to your beer. Flavors that can come through, depending on specific malts, are biscuit, cracker, nutty, and toasty flavors. Typically, toasted malts can make up anywhere from 1 to 30%. Common varieties are Vienna, Munich, Victory, Biscuit, Aromatic, Amber, Brown, and Special Roast. Caramel malts add sweetness and color to your beer. They're super common in older recipes and are nice if you use them sparingly for a pop of caramel color and sweetness. They can range from 2 Lovibond up to 500 Lovibond that can add some fruity, roasty notes. But overall, caramel malts can lack some of the depth that toasted malts give. Common varieties are anything that's called crystal, caramel, or starts with cara something. I recommend, if using, you keep them under 10% of the grain bill. Roasted malts add dark color and flavor. They give notes of chocolate, coffee, smoke, and burnt toast. These malts range from about 200 Lovibond and up. Keep the amount of these low in your grain bill, below 10%, to avoid bitter and harsh flavors. Common varieties are pale chocolate, carafa, roasted barley, and black malt. Adjunct grains. These are typically not malted, but can add flavor and impact mouthfeel and body. Common adjunct grains are rice, oats, corn, flaked barley, and torrefied wheat. Another malt you might see are acid malts, which help adjust the pH of your mash, but I'll cover pH in a future video. That's just a quick look, and the topic is boundless. But if you're interested in knowing more about malts, I recommend you checking out Genus Brewing's channel. They have several videos breaking down malts in more detail. When you're choosing malts for your beer, you want to start thinking about the qualities you're looking for in your beer. Do you want a beer that's bready with some biscuit flavor and nothing too in your face? Or are you looking for some deep roasty chocolate flavor with a full mouthfeel? Picture the dream beer in your mind and find the malts that match the style of your vision. It's a good idea to surf the internet and magazines for recipes of your favorite styles or even clones of your favorite beers. Take a look at the grain bills. You'll start to get a sense of how much of a certain grain or ingredient is used and what types are used. But the only way to really get to know the ingredient is to taste it and brew with it. Taste the raw ingredients if you can. It can give you a good sense of the flavor. But the biggest tip I can give is to start simple with your recipe. Pick 1 to 3 malts for your first recipe and then expand from there in future brews. You can purchase malts from online or local homebrew stores, and each store might have a little something different, so shop around and find a store you like. The question now becomes, how much do I need to use? I'll start by saying I highly recommend using a recipe builder to create your grain bill. Recipe builders take in a lot of information about the grains to estimate the final SRM, original gravity, and other details that can help you throughout the brew day and beyond. I use BeerSmith, which is a paid application for only $15 a year, but there are some free options online as well. I'll link to one. They really take a lot of guessing out of the process. Once you let the software know how much beer you're trying to make, you can start adding amounts of grains and you'll see the estimated gravity rise. From there, just play around until you get it in the range you want. Sure, there are calculations you can do to determine the amount you need, but I don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. Let the software do the work for you. But in general, the more malts you add, the more sugar will be in the wort and the stronger the beer will be. So let's build out a sample grain bill. I'm going to make a pale ale and I'm aiming for about a 1.052 original gravity. So I'll start out with 9 pounds pale ale 2-row, a pretty standard ale malt, and 2 pounds of victory malt, for a touch of added toasty complexity. Before using the malts, they need to be cracked or crushed to expose the interior of the grain. To do this, you'll need a barley crusher, but don't worry, homebrew stores have one that you can use for free, or a small fee when you shop online. I brewed all grain for several years before getting one myself, which then allowed me to buy more in bulk and set how fine I crush. Once the grains are crushed, we can now perform what is called a mash. Mashing is the process of steeping the grains in hot water for a certain amount of time to extract the sugars from the malts, creating wort. These sugars in the wort will be fermented by the yeast to create the beer. To steep, we need water. A good rule of thumb is that if you like the way your water tastes, it will make good beer, and I stand by that. I brew almost all my beer with tap water, and it tastes great to me. But if you don't like how your water tastes, or if you want more control over the mineral content in your water, you can start from reverse osmosis or distilled water and add your own water salts. Water chemistry is important for brewers to consider, as beer is more than 90% water, and the minerals and salts in water have a huge impact on flavor. But that's an advanced topic for beginner brewers, so just go with good tasting water and you'll still make great beer. To answer the question of how much water to use, you first need to determine the equipment you're planning on using. There are several systems for brewing all grain, and I won't go over all of them, but the most common home brewing styles are 3-vessel, single infusion, and brew in a bag. 3-vessel. As the name suggests, you'll need 3 vessels, one for mashing, one for holding hot liquor, aka water, and one for boiling the wort. This is the most involved and the most equipment needed for all of these methods. Single infusion, often made from a converted cooler where you dump all the grains and hot water in and let it mash, and then boil in a separate kettle. Brew in a bag. This is the method I most commonly use. This is where the boil kettle is also the mashing vessel, and the grains are added to a bag during the mash and pulled out before the boil. This method has the least amount of equipment needed. Depending on which system you choose, you can add that information into your recipe builder to spit out the amount of water needed. There are some other factors to get the precise amount of water, like brewhouse efficiency and equipment losses, but we'll just keep it simple and leave that for another day. Moving forward, I'm going to be referencing brew in a bag, since this is the method I use, and I believe it's the easiest and cheapest way to get into all grain. But in general, these ideas cross over to any style of brewing. Some things you'll need for brew in a bag. For a typical 5.5 gallon batch, I use an 8 gallon kettle. Of course, if you're making smaller batches, feel free to use a smaller kettle. You just want to make sure you don't run into any overflowing issues, since we'll be adding the grains and water at the same time. Then to heat the kettle, we need a burner of some kind. Either propane or even a kitchen stovetop can work. I prefer propane so I can brew outside, plus it's easier to clean if you make a mess. You also need a brew bag, which is a fabric bag that will hold the grains and act like a tea bag during the mash. Let's get started by adding the water into the kettle and heating it up to mashing temperatures. Typically we mash between 145 and 158 degrees Fahrenheit, and depending on where you mash in that range, you'll get different results in your beer. Mashing on the low end will give you a lighter body and mouthfeel with a more fermentable wort, meaning a stronger and crisp beer. And mashing on the high end increases the body and gives you a less fermentable wort, meaning a thicker and less strong beer. So for an average ale, if you want to hit the perfect balance of these characteristics, you need to mash and hold the temperature at 152. Adding grains will inherently drop the temp of the water, so heat up the water about 10 degrees higher than your desired mash temperature. Now we add the crushed grains and start mashing. First, turn off the burner and add your grain bag. Now add the grains slowly, stirring to break up any clumps or dough balls. Conventional wisdom tells brewers to hold the mash for 60 minutes to extract as much of the available sugars as possible. But thanks to improvements in the malting industry, this is not necessarily true anymore. Most of the conversion happens in the first 20 minutes, so there's some flexibility here for how long you want to mash for. If you have the time and the patience, then go for 60. But if you're looking to save some time on the brew day, you can chop this down to 30 or 45 minutes with minimal loss in extraction. If you find your temp drops too much, then you can heat up the mash and give it a stir until you're back at the right range. But don't get stressed if it drops a few degrees. You won't ruin your beer if you aren't super precise here. When your timer's up, it's now time to remove the grains from the wort. To do this, we simply pull the bag out of the kettle. It's hot, so be careful. If you have heat-proof gloves, that's recommended. I use a cooling rack to place on top of my kettle to place the bag on. That way it can keep draining out, and it gives me a chance to squeeze the bag to get the most wort out that I can. Or at this time, I can also sparge, which is when you add additional hot water to rinse the grains and get more sugars out that might be still in the bag. Both of these steps are optional, but can help get the most out of your wort. The grains then can be tossed in the compost, or you can reuse them in other ways, like baking breads or dog treats. And that's really all there is to all grain. From here on out, it's the same brew day as an extract brew day or a regular brew day. Boil, add some hops, and cool down before putting the wort in your fermenter and adding some yeast. If there's something I covered that you want me to do a deeper dive on, let me know in the comments. While from the outside, brewing all grain can seem intimidating, but it really just takes some prep, a few pieces of equipment, and a little bit of creativity. If you're looking to make the best beer, all grain is the way to go, because it gives you all the flexibility you need, whether in the recipe where you can get the desired flavor combinations, or on the brew day where you can impact characteristics in the beer. If you've ever wanted to brew all grain, there's never been a better time to try. If you found this video helpful, give it a like, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Good luck and happy brewing. Thanks for watching.